Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Chris. Today, first and foremost, crazy times. I mean, looking at the recent storms that have been, pounding Florida, it's pretty crazy. People talk about, different weather events in different parts of the country. Climate change, this and that. And it's, ever since I was a kid, I remember hearing about, the storms that hit Florida, like Hurricane Andrew and, the ones previous to that. But it's always kind of been like, I assume it's something that you just kind of deal with, right? When you live in the Gulf states or in Florida, you're kind of, I would think, kind of used to that kind of stuff. I mean, if there is such a thing as getting used to it. But it seems like, I'm not sure, if it's more that anything's really changed with it. They say that, the hurricanes are getting more intense or more frequent, or they're hitting different areas than they used to, which again could be just normal ebb and flow of, how weather moves around. But it is crazy to think, because I always think about it here in California. We have earthquakes. We haven't had a really big earthquake in quite a while. But and for context, anything bigger than like a 6.5, anything that starts to get into the 7 range, that's a big earthquake. That's big. Anything like 5 and below, I mean, typically if you've lived in California, you don't even get up from where you're sitting. You kind of just ride it out. Just, it's kind of, it is what it is. But, looking at what's going on in Florida, it's kind of crazy to me because, I know that, a lot of the older folks from the Northeast, go down to live in Florida. They move to the retirement communities and the weather's good. There's a lot of good things about Florida as far as, things to do and things to see. I've visited, multiple places in Florida. I enjoyed going there for vacation, except having to shower a few times a day because of the humidity. But even that's something that, every place has its pros and cons. But looking at, the last couple of years, like I said, with the weather events, particularly in Florida and the Gulf Coast, it's interesting because I ask myself, like anything else, right? Like, news is kind of in our face constantly, right? Like, so as soon as something happens, like we're hearing about it, we're fixating on it. And of course, the news, that's their job, right? They're for-profit corporations. So the idea is to make money. So they want to keep you captivated. And what's the best way to do that? Fear, like everything else. Fear. So, but when I watch these things and, for example, Hurricane Helene, how, it flooded places that typically you wouldn't think, would get flooded. It's pretty crazy. But the other thing that kind of threw me off, which I was like, wow, was, a lot of times, like if you're not from those areas, you hear about the categories of the storms and the wind speed and this and that. But I mean, at the end of the day, what does the real damage? The water, right? Like either the rainfall or the storm surge. And so something that was really crazy to me was I was watching the news, and I think it was in Tampa Bay, somewhere around there, that there was a hospital that had these, barriers that are like supposed to stop storm surge up to like, I think it was like 15 feet. And it just looked like a fence made of, interlocking pieces. And I was like, how the hell is that stopping the water? Because the water was maybe 10 feet high, 12 feet high, which is nuts. Like seeing basically a lake on the other side of that barrier. I was like, wow, that's nuts. Like first the engineering behind it, because it literally behind it, like when inside the fence, like it was basically surrounding a hospital. Inside the fence, it looked like like if you put up a chain link fence, it has the metal bars on the bottom to hold it up, and that kind of thing. So it didn't look like a really like massive structure to put these things up, but apparently was holding back all the weight of that water, which was just insane to me. But it's interesting that those kind of things exist, and they work. But looking at that kind of stuff, I mean, it's crazy, with all the other stuff going on in Florida. I mean, again, from the political side, like it just seems like just one thing after another is just crazy. The whole, I forget what it was, the workers thing that DeSantis did, where it was like, I don't know if it was aimed at like illegal immigrants or something or other, but something to do with like the construction workers didn't want to, they were going to lose a lot of construction workers because of it. And then, the whole insurance debacle with that kind of thing. Insurers pulling out of Florida, and then the insurers that stayed behind, their solvency being in question. It's just crazy. Like, I'm like, well, how does that work? If you have a mortgage on the property, you're required to have, homeowners insurance. And what if you can't get coverage? How does that work? What happens at that point? Because you obviously can't self-insure. You don't have the money to pay off the property. So how do those things work? Crazy times. And I think about it, and like, I watched like a couple of channels about like property and like real estate agents in Florida, and like what they're saying about, different areas. And what they're talking about is that, obviously, first and foremost, a lot of people are cutting their losses and getting out, price wise, like selling at $50,000-$100,000 discount from, what the prices were just a few months back. But also they were talking about like a lot of like Californians leaving, people that came during the pandemic, because the price was right, and kind of seeing how it is and deciding, it's just not worth it, even if the price is cheaper. I don't know how much validity there is to that, but that's kind of their spiel on it, that people that move to these areas because cost of living was just lower realize that, it's not all roses and daisies. There's issues there. But I think that this kind of thing's interesting because it kind of all ties back into like silver, gold, stocks, all that different stuff. Because one of the things that I think people have been kind of waiting for, especially people who've been, wanting to buy a house or things like that, is here in California. I mean, it's very difficult because prices don't budge, particularly if you're in a good area. You're not getting any discounts. I mean, even when, there's a slowdown, it's more just that prices aren't rising as quickly, not that they're really dropping. So like, you're not going to get any discount in any place you would want to live, which is, that's kind of the name of the game. I mean, the last 30 years, LA's continuously pushed outward now, where, people live, in planned communities and in the straight up desert, which, 20 years ago, it was literally just pure desert. And people are out there, with these planned communities now, and they paid, pretty good money, relatively, in the maybe 300,000s to get these properties, which they're nice houses. But again, when you look at where they are, I mean, you're basically in another state at that point. You're just way out in the middle of nowhere, which is crazy. But I think one of the things that people have been waiting for might actually start, coming down the pike, which is prices of stuff starting to fall, which economically that's not a good thing. You don't want to see that kind of thing, because that is, an actual economic negative, contrary to popular belief. People talk about inflation and this and that. No, the biggest threat to any economy is deflation. You don't want deflation. But I think, one of the hard parts with the last few years with the rate jumps was, people were like, oh, well, as rates go up, property prices are going to come down because no one's going to be buying property. Yes, potentially, that sounds logical, but the other part of the equation was also inventory is going to dry up because people can't leave their mortgage. If you've got a 2%, 3% mortgage, you're not leaving that for, to go somewhere else, even if the price is cheaper, to pay 7% on a mortgage. It just doesn't make sense. Now, for me, if that was the case, if I knew someone who was in that situation where they had a low rate mortgage and they were considering moving elsewhere, I personally would have told them, hey, if the price is right, go ahead and do it, because yes, you will pay a higher mortgage right out the gate, as far as the rate. But the reality is, like, if you understand how the banks and stuff work, they, when the rates start to fall, they fall all over each other to refinance, to, take that loan, refinance it. They make the origination fees, and then they just sell it off again to, investors. So, I mean, if you understand how the mechanism works, I wouldn't have balked at, hey, if I find the right price, that's the main dictator of what I want to do, especially if it's in a place that I want to live. But again, considering that here in California, there's just no discounts. Like, The people here, I think people would be surprised to see. So myself, I'm in the South Bay currently. So like this area is like Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach, Torrance, Palos Verdes, El Segundo. These areas, I think it's kind of underestimated how much money these people have. They're normal, white collar workers, engineers, a lot of just big firms here. But they are natural savers, and they have low cost of living because they kind of just by default live within their means for the most part. And I'm startled to think like, wow, like these guys are sitting on this much cash, that kind of stuff, where elsewhere people are like, they couldn't afford $1,000 bill or anything that popped up. It's pretty crazy because these people could literally go to another state and buy 3, 4, 5, 6 houses for the value of their home. And it's not anything about their home is extraordinary, they're living in a mansion or anything like that. It's just mainly the location. The prices of these houses are insane, and it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon. But this all, again, it was brought to my attention because of what's going on with Florida, and like people having to make the decision to leave or to rebuild or those kind of things. And it seems like that's becoming more and more of an issue. Like I don't live there, but from the outside and hearing from the people that live there, like through YouTube and different things, it does seem like this kind of thing's not sustainable, where people are going to want to move there if that's the kind of stuff that they have to deal with. It's crazy. And I'm sure it's the same in other states. Florida probably gets the bulk of the attention for that kind of thing. But as a Californian, obviously we have earthquakes, which a big earthquake could devastate this whole LA County, San Diego, all these areas. But it's so much less frequent than something like a hurricane, where it's like you have a season every year where something's coming down the pike. It's just crazy. It's crazy to think about. And I think about if real estate starts to go down, then potentially that type of a slowdown that would bring on something like that would affect things like gold, silver, stocks. Because again, if there's just concern in general, assets in general start to sell off. It doesn't have to be a logical thing where money's moving from this to that. If there's just general unease, again, everyone runs back to the dollar, whether we like it or not. The dollar, cash does become king in that type of uncertainty. So I'm interested to see what the next couple of years hold from that standpoint. And again, it's nothing to do with politics really. It's more just the nature of the beast as far as the economy and things that really weigh on the economy. But seeing what's going on in Florida and places like that, it's interesting, and it's something to keep your eye on.